The anvil sang. It was a sound Elias had known since before he could walk, a rhythmic, resonant clang that was the heartbeat of his childhood. His father, a blacksmith in the small mountain town of Atherton, would lift him onto a stool by the forge, and Elias would watch, mesmerized, as fire transformed cold, rigid metal into horseshoes, gates, and tools. The world was simple then. You had iron, you had fire, you had will, and you created something that would last. But the world, Elias learned, had little use for things that lasted anymore. He was 16 when the last remaining ranch outside of town switched to aluminum composite fencing. He was 20 when the tourism board decided that Atherton's charm lay not in its working-class roots, but in its artisanal experiences, candle-making workshops and gourmet food tours. The blacksmith shop, with its soot and its roar, was an eyesore. His father, a man of few words and immense shoulders, took the news with the same stoicism with which he approached a red-hot horseshoe. He banked the forge for the last time, hung his hammer on its hook, and looked at his son. "The fire's out, Eli," was all he said. A month later he was gone too, taken by a grief that had nothing to do with the body. At 22, Elias inherited the shop. It wasn't an inheritance of wealth, but of memory. It was a cold, dark space filled with the ghosts of heat and purpose. He had a choice: let it crumble, or try to resurrect a dying art in a world that saw it as obsolete. He chose to fight. For a year, he tried everything. He opened the doors on weekends, demonstrating his craft for curious tourists who would take a picture, buy a $10 iron rose from a bin, and leave. He tried modernizing, creating sleek, minimalist steel furniture. A local boutique agreed to sell a few pieces, but they were soon returned, the owner explaining kindly that they were a little too rustic for their clientele. He built a website, his creations looking dull and lifeless against the perfectly lit, photoshopped images of mass-produced goods. The world didn't want heavy, handmade, and honest. It wanted cheap, fast, and new. The debt grew. The letters from the bank, once a pale yellow, turned a stark and urgent red. He stopped answering his phone. He stopped eating regular meals. The shop, once a place of creation, became a prison of failure. The silence was the worst part. The anvil no longer sang, it just sat there, a cold, black monument to his father's legacy and his own inadequacy. One Tuesday, a day that felt like all other gray, hopeless days, he received the final notice. He had 30 days to vacate the premises. He sat on the dusty floor, his back against the cold forge, holding his father's hammer. It felt heavier than he remembered. The weight wasn't in the iron head, but in the crushing mass of all the expectations he had failed to meet. That night, unable to bear the silent judgment of the shop, he went to the Rusty Nail, the town's only bar. He sat in a corner, nursing a cheap whiskey he couldn't afford, when an old man with a face like a crumpled paper bag sat down across from him. It was Silas, the last farrier in the county, a man who still shoed horses the old way. He didn't ask how Elias was. He just said, "Saw the light on in your daddy's shop. Felt good to see it." Elias grunted. "Won't be on for much longer." Silas nodded, unsurprised. "It's a tough go. World's moving fast. But you know what I've learned about folks, boy. They're all running from something. They fill their houses with slick, shiny things that have no soul because their own lives feel slick and soulless. They don't know what they are missing because they've never held it." He leaned forward, his eyes sharp and clear despite his age. "You don't sell a horseshoe, Elias. You sell the sound it makes on the road. You don't sell a gate, you sell the feel of coming home. You're not a blacksmith. You're a memory keeper. But you're trying to sell memories to people who have forgotten how to remember." Silas left as quietly as he came, leaving Elias with a whiskey that had gone warm and a mind that was suddenly, painfully awake. The next morning, Elias didn't open the shop. He walked past the new artisan candle shop, where the smell of mountain pine was cloying and fake. He walked past the gourmet food market, where a jar of pickles cost more than his father used to make in a day. He walked until he was out of town, up the old logging road to a place he hadn't been since he was a child. It was the Henderson place, a farm that had been left to rot 20 years ago. The barn was a skeleton, the house a hollow shell. but in the front yard, leaning at a sad angle, was an old farm gate. It was a mess, a chaos of rusted iron, bent bars, and broken hinges. It was worthless. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He saw the stories in the rust, the impatient shove of a farmer's shoulder after a long day, the eager push of children swinging on it, the deep, satisfied sigh as it was latched at the end of a good year. It was just a gate. It was a diary written in iron. He spent the rest of the day taking it apart, bolt by rusted bolt. He hauled the pieces back to his shop on an old handcart. For the first time in months he felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was curiosity. He didn't try to make it new. He treated it like an archaeological find. He used the gentlest wire brushes to remove the loose scale, revealing the textures of a century of weather underneath a palette of deep oranges, browns, and blacks that no manufactured paint could replicate. He found the original owner's initials, J.H., crudely stamped into the latch plate. He reforged a missing hinge, not to match the new iron, but to create a deliberate contrast, the bright, fresh steel a symbol of the present holding up the beauty of the past. He repaired the broken bars, leaving the weld lines visible as scars that told a story of survival. It took him 2 weeks. He worked from before dawn until late into the night, not for a client, but for himself. For the first time, he wasn't trying to sell anything. He was just listening to the iron and letting it tell its tale. When he was done, he stood back. The gate, now mounted on a simple frame he'd built, was no longer a piece of junk. It was a sculpture. It was a piece of Atherton's soul, rescued from oblivion. He called a photographer friend and asked for a favor. He needed a picture, but not a product shot. He needed a portrait. The friend came and they waited. They waited for the golden hour, that magic time just before sunset. They hauled the gate back to the abandoned farm and set it in its original place. As the low sun set the rust on fire, turning it to liquid copper and amber, the photographer took the shot. It was a picture of absence and presence, of time and memory. It wasn't a gate. It was a ghost made beautiful. Elias didn't post it on his website. He posted it on a new social media account he created, one not for Elias Black, artisan blacksmith, but one simply called The Memory Keeper. The caption was a single sentence: "Found this old gate on an abandoned farm. It asked me to help it tell its story." The response was slow at first. A few likes, a comment from a local woman saying her grandfather, John Henderson, J.H., had built that gate. She asked if she could see it. Elias said yes. She came to the shop, an elderly woman with bright eyes. When she saw the gate, she didn't compliment the craftsmanship. She reached out a trembling hand and touched the latch. "He always fixed it," she whispered. "It would always sag and he'd say, 'One of these days I'm gonna fix this thing for good.' But he never did. Because he knew we loved the sound it made when it dragged on the ground." She looked at Elias, tears streaming down her face. "You gave him back to me," she told everyone she knew. Other people started coming, not to buy, but to share. An old rancher brought a broken branding iron. A widow brought her late husband's favorite hammer, its handle splintered. A young couple brought the twisted remains of a wrought iron bed frame that had been in the family for generations, damaged in a move. They didn't want it restored to perfection. They just wanted it to be whole again, with its history intact. Elias's shop became a kind of confessional. His forge was no longer a place of production, but a place of healing. Each piece he worked on taught him something new. He learned that a dent wasn't a flaw, it was a moment frozen in time. A patch of rust wasn't decay, it was the patina of a life well lived. His work began to change. A simple fire poker he made wasn't smooth and straight. He gave it a slight, almost imperceptible curve, inspired by the way the old farm gate had leaned. A set of andirons he forged had feet that looked like the gnarled roots of the ancient oak tree in the town square. He was no longer just shaping metal. He was translating the language of his town into a physical form. Word spread beyond Atherton. An art critic from the city visiting a nearby resort heard the story and made the detour. He stood in Elias's shop, surrounded by the tools of a forgotten trade and the pieces of 100 personal histories. He wrote a piece for a major magazine. It wasn't about art in the traditional sense. It was about authenticity. It was about the human need for connection in a disconnected age. Suddenly, Elias's inbox wasn't full of bills. It was full of messages from all over the country. A museum in Chicago wanted to commission a piece inspired by the city's old steel mills. A novelist wanted a custom bookend shaped like a gnarled tree root. A family in California sent him a box of rusted tools from their ancestors' gold rush journey, asking him to create a single sculpture from them, a totem of their family's beginning. The 30 days to vacate came and went. Elias owned the building now, the debt paid off with the first few commissions. He didn't expand. He didn't hire help. He kept the shop exactly as it was, a small, one-man operation. He had learned that value wasn't in scale, but in substance. One evening, a year after Silas's visit to the bar, a young man knocked on his door. He was maybe 19, with a nervous energy and eyes that couldn't seem to focus on any one thing. "Mr. Black?" he asked. "Just Elias," he replied. The young man, whose name was Leo, stepped inside. He looked around, his gaze finally settling on the forge. "My dad says I'm wasting my time, that the world is all code and screens now, that I need to learn something useful." He looked at Elias, a desperate hope in his eyes. "But I saw the picture of that old gate. I read what you do, and I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do. I just don't know where to start." Elias looked at the boy, and for a moment he saw himself. Not the successful version, but the one from 2 years ago, sitting on this same dusty floor, his back against a cold forge, holding a hammer that felt too heavy. He saw the fear of obsolescence, the terror of being a relic in a world that worshipped the new. He walked over to the wall and took down his father's second-best hammer. It was lighter, made for a younger, smaller hand. He handed it to Leo. The boy's fingers closed around the worn wooden handle. "The fire's not out, Leo," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's just waiting for someone new to stoke it." He gestured for Leo to follow him to the forge. As he began to explain the art of building a fire, of listening to the coal, of finding the right heat, the anvil sat silently by. But it wasn't a silence of death anymore. It was the silence of anticipation, of potential. It was the silence just before the first note of a song. Elias knew, with a certainty that ran deeper than bone, that soon the anvil would sing again. It would sing a new song, a different song, one that blended the echoes of the past with the hopes of the future. And as he showed the boy how to hold the hammer, how to feel the weight, how to see the story hidden in a plain bar of iron, he realized that this was the story he had been forging all along. Not of metal, but of meaning. He had tried to force the world to need him. He had failed. But the moment he stopped trying to be needed and started listening to what the world had forgotten it needed, he became indispensable. The fire wasn't in the forge. It was in the memory, in the story, in the human heart. And that, he had finally learned, is a fire that can never, ever go out. This story, the journey of Elias, is a reminder that our greatest challenges are often the prologue to our most defining chapters. When the world tells you that you are obsolete, that your skills are useless, and your dreams are a waste of time, it's not an ending. It's a question. The question is not whether you can force your way into the world, but whether you have the courage to find the one thing only you can offer. Your unique value isn't in being newer, faster, or shinier than everyone else. It's in being more you. So, if you're standing in the ashes of a dead-end job, a failed project, or a shattered dream, look closer. The fire isn't out, it's just waiting for you to find the right thing to burn. Your rust is not your ruin, it's the patina of your experience. Your scars are not your shame, they are the visible proof that you have survived. If Elias's story sparked something in you today, if it reminded you that there is power and persistence and beauty in the broken, then help us keep the forge burning. Don't let this story just fade into the noise of your feed. Hit that like button, it's a small spark. But together, those sparks become a fire. And if you want to hear more stories of resilience, of forgotten trades, and of people who found their fire, subscribe to the channel. Join our community of memory keepers. Because in a world that's always trying to make us new, sometimes the most radical thing we can do is remember who we are. Thanks for watching, and keep forging your own path.